All right. It looks like we're getting a nice, healthy group of attendees. And to make sure that we save the precious time for the important content, I will just go through a couple of housekeeping points and give you the agenda for today. So first of all, we're looking to run this webinar for about 25-30 minutes to leave ample time for all of your questions. To submit your questions, you can pretty much start now if you've already arrived prepared with some pressing inquiries for Chris. You can use the Q&A tab on your screens. I will be monitoring them throughout the webinar, and I will make sure to pick up the questions that are relevant at the Q&A section in the end. And if we don't get to your questions, rest assured that we will get back in touch with you and answer any inquiries via email after the webinar. And talking about the things I will be monitoring, I know that you cannot see other attendees right now, but let's just say I'm very, very happy to announce that you are in great company today. It is fantastic to see that the people tuned into this session are representing top employers in the UK, the Netherlands, South Africa, Kenya, Germany, and France. I don't want to give away all of the information, but let's just say the brands that I see online are truly household names within media, broadcasting, consulting, banking, global legal companies, NGOs, you name it. I have to say on behalf of Uber for Business, having you, key decision makers, as our audience during a webinar on sustainable travel is becoming more and more important with every, it is fair to say, day. Those of you in London have witnessed a rainstorm just this week when 1 month's worth of water plummeted from the sky in just over an hour, which is genuinely insane. And sadly to say, as we all know, such occurrences are only going to become more frequent as average global temperatures rise. But before I go on for too long, I know that I'm preaching to the choir and to a very, very educated audience here. So it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Christopher Hook. Chris is Head of Vehicles and Clean Air Lead at Uber. He's responsible for Uber's work on vehicles and the portfolio of clean air initiatives across the UK and Ireland. He has spent the last decade working at the intersection of business and sustainability, helping companies be more strategic and impactful in their response to the challenges posed by the climate emergency. So with that, Chris, please take it away.
Thank you, Maria. Good morning. I just reiterate what Maria said. Absolutely great to be speaking to you all. Unfortunately, I was one of the people who experienced said rainstorm, and most of the downstairs of my flat has been underwater since. So apologies in advance if I'm a little unprepared in places. It's not been the week I had expected it was going to be. But I've been working this issue for a long time, and so I'm hoping I can still talk you through what is a really important topic to us, and I know to all of you, and then answer your questions. I have, as Maria said, about 25 minutes worth of stuff I want to cover. It's really in just in two parts. Briefly at the beginning, why sustainability is important to Uber. I don't think that's going to really be news to anybody, but I just thought it would be helpful to outline how we think about the problem. And then to cover the commitments that we've made, both at a global level and then locally here in London. As Maria said, I'm based in the London office. I have responsibility for everything that we do related to sustainability here in the UK, but also feeding into the teams who work across Europe and in the US. And it's fair to say London has been very much at the forefront of our efforts within Uber on how to push to a more sustainable transport system and how to address our own footprint and impact. And I can talk a little bit about what that looks like in a moment. So first things first, why is sustainability important to Uber? I mean, the big context is an obvious one, but an important one to remember, which is that as we look to decarbonize the economy in general, and as we push towards things like net zero targets as quickly as we possibly can, transport has a very significant role to play. And, it was just yesterday, the government in the UK published their transport decarbonisation plan. But as this chart and many others will show, there's a lot of work to do. Transport is an outlier in the sense of having not managed to achieve significant reductions over the last 25 years. In fact, it's emitted more carbon over that period. And so if we're going to do something about decarbonisation as a society, we absolutely have to do something about it in the transport industry. And if Uber is going to play a big role in the transport industry, which is clearly our ambition, then we have a responsibility and an obligation to play our part and to be a progressive actor on that front. And that is important in terms of carbon emissions and all of the things that result from those in terms of global climate change and localized events like Monday night. But it also has a much more immediate and local impact on health. And I think we, as a company that operates in lots of big cities around the world, and it has therefore a very strong connection with our big urban centres, really also understand that things that we do to move our fleets away from petrol and diesel vehicles can have a very profound impact on local health outcomes. And air pollution has been a topic that's got a lot of attention, much needed attention in London over the last few years. And I think we're really starting to understand the extent to which transport and road transport especially impacts people's day-to-day lives and health. So that chart on the right-hand side there is nitrous oxide in London. Moving away from internal combustion engine vehicles should also have a really positive impact on local health and neighbourhoods. And so what do we think we want to do about that? I mean, there's lots of ways in which we can address sustainability, but by far and away the most important is for us to reduce the impact of the fleet of vehicles that use Uber. So all the drivers who find work through our platform, they all own and operate their own vehicles, but we can do everything that we would like to do, everything we can to accelerate the shift to that being fully electric. And I'll talk in a moment about the commitments we've made around that journey. And it's not a very complicated rationale as to why. On the first hand, a move to a battery electric vehicle, whilst it doesn't get us down to zero lifetime emissions, it has a very substantial impact and obviously removes the exhaust emissions, which are, contribute to both the global warming concerns and the local health impacts, and is a big step in the right direction in terms of that decarbonisation. And the more you use that vehicle, ride-hailing drivers use their vehicles up to 4 or 5 times as much as the general public, the more important that emissions reduction becomes associated with the exhaust. So we think there's a really positive impact to be had there if we accelerate towards electrification. And we think there's a really positive impact that can then create in the wider ecosystem. We produced a report last year that I'm hoping some of you will have seen called Spark, and that was us setting out what we thought needed to be true in order for us to move quickly to a fully electric system, not just for Uber, but for society more generally. And doing that in a way that makes sense for high usage drivers who drive in big urban centres should help to start a positive feedback loop in which the case for investment in the vehicle technology, the case for investment in the charging technology, the rollout of both should accelerate over time. And so that is our hope and our ambition. And I'll talk again in a moment about some of the work that we're doing, both with the vehicle manufacturers, with government, and with charging companies to try and make sure that this goes as fast as it possibly can. So what have we committed to do as a global business? So last September, we set out a roadmap to get from where we are today to net zero everywhere that we operate in the world. And we said we would do 4 things at the same time. We would expand the ways in which people could opt to use cleaner versions of Uber in all the cities in which we operate. We would help drivers go electric as quickly as we possibly could. We would invest in Uber becoming a place where you can choose many different modes of transport and not be reliant on just cars. And you'll have seen some of those partnerships. Again, I can talk a little bit about those as we go through. And then we would be transparent and accountable. We would do things like this. We would talk to our partners on why we thought this was important, but we would also produce reports on our own footprint, be honest where we were making progress, where we were finding it difficult to make progress, progress and the kind of impact that we're having, not just in terms of our operations and our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, but more broadly the emissions associated with use of the platform, so that we could see progress and we could hold ourselves to account on making that progress. And we see that as a number of steps. So by 2040, we want to be net zero everywhere that we operate all around the world. There's 10,000 cities in which you can get an Uber today. But we can't really think it's right to just set a very long-term target and not have some guideposts along the way. So the first one of those comes in 2025, where we said we will be 100% electric in London and Amsterdam, which are two of our major cities in Europe. And that we will be, in aggregate, 50% EV across our 7 most significant European cities. So that includes London and Amsterdam, but also includes places like Paris and Madrid and a number of others. We'll replicate that same goal for all of our major US, Canada, European cities by 2030, and then we'll look to expand beyond those cities over the course of 2040. And clearly, to get to that point, to be 100% electric in those cities is going to be a lot of work. And I'm going to talk a little bit in a moment about the kind of work that's going into achieving that London goal. But it couldn't be more important work. And it's work that we need to do as a collaboration. I think, we'll be the first to admit that whilst there are many things we can and should do as a company, this is a joined up effort. It's going to take action from all parts of society, but it's going to particularly be important to work together. And so companies that can collaborate, be they members of the ecosystem who actually are going to get this operationalized and the technology out there and at a price point that makes sense for people, or be they partners who want to work with us to help their employees or their customers make more sustainable choices. I think it's all important that we are in this together, and I know that is a sentiment that many of you will share. This is not about us trying to outcompete. This is about us doing the right thing and accepting our responsibility and working as closely as we can with all of our constituents to make that happen. So let me just give you a bit more detail on what's happening in London, because I think it's both the city where we are sort of furthest along the journey. Today we started earliest, but also a good case study for hopefully what is coming down the track, and I'm hoping we'll give you a sense of what it means as we electrify Uber and we start to move it to a much cleaner footing. So back in 2019, late 2018, we committed to this goal to be fully electric by the end of 2025 in London, and we launched something called the Clean Air Plan, and that was a mechanism by which we thought we could help to accelerate that shift. Now, clearly, if we did nothing and just relied on the market, some proportion of the business would be electric by 2025. Other people are doing important stuff. The government have made important moves. Transport for London and the Mayor's Office have made some very important interventions in terms of what it means to operate a car in the city as a professional. And we've seen, very substantial uptick over the last 2 years, especially in terms of sales of new vehicles. But we know from all of the work that we do with drivers and all of the ways in which we can forecast this forward that it would not be enough for us to just rely on the actions of others to hit this goal in this time period. By 2025, we're still going to be in fairly small percentages of new vehicles coming through the sort of sales that will be fully electric. And so we had to do more and try and find mechanisms to accelerate this as quickly as we possibly could. And so doing more really means taking positive action across these 8 topics. And this is what me and my team spend our days doing, and working with lots and lots of people from across Uber and Uber for Business and all parts of our organization. It means making sure that drivers have access to electric vehicles that are as affordable as possible. It means incentivizing that adoption by ensuring that drivers earn as well as they can in those vehicles, and it's something which is economically the right choice for them. You'll be not surprised to hear if we set this up in such a way that doesn't make financial sense, we will always be pushing uphill, and not a choice that we can be forcing on others. It needs to make sense for all parties involved, especially for the drivers who are purchasing these vehicles and then using them. We want to make sure that charging is as affordable and accessible and as widespread as possible, and do what we can do to really accelerate that. And then really importantly, and I think sometimes slightly overlooked, work to ensure that the reason why we're on this journey and the importance of this journey is well articulated, and that we engage with the driver base. You know, 45,000 drivers in London who regularly provide services through the Uber app. That's a big constituency of people to talk to and to engage. And you know, we've been putting lots of things in place to really make sure that message gets across, and it gets across well. So that is the core of what my team do, and the work. And I'm going to give you some examples in a second of the progress we've made against those. And then in support of that, you know, it's about us engaging positively and constructively with government at both the local level and the national level, and you know, often at the international level too, be that the European Union or OECD or others. It's about us engaging with riders and the general public. And actually, one of the things I want to talk to you about specifically is about the ways in which we feel like the corporate rider base is a really important part of that puzzle. It's about engaging with industry, and it's about us being transparent, as I said, and publishing both insights that we garner from our own work and our own data, but also, you know, what we learn as we go through. We're participating in various trials and experiments and pieces of work to help ensure that, you know, we just try and do what we do to share the benefits of anything that we learn along the way, or let others use us as an example to test things they want to know. For example, we're part of a group trialing various types of smart charging technology for whom the Uber driver is a great exemplar that they can use as they start to build that out. So that is the project, I guess you would call it that. As you can see, it's quite broad and wide-ranging, but each of those component parts is critically important if we're going to make this transition. At its very heart is this idea that we need to make the vehicles as cheap and as readily available as possible. EVs are more expensive than their non-electric equivalents. That's especially true when you think about the fact that most Uber drivers, and matter of fact, most people, will buy second-hand vehicles, not brand new vehicles, and EVs are still a very new technology. So all the figures that you see about sales of electric vehicles going up and up are true, but they're all really focused on people who buy new cars, and that's quite a small proportion of the general public. So there's a lot of work to do to make that cost equation make sense. And we really see two roles that we can play in that. The first is partnership, and we have, you know, the logos there on the left are organizations that we have put in place partnerships with, be that discounts on the vehicles, access to specific types of vehicle, or arrangements through which people can use some of the financial support that they've got from us, which I'll talk again about in a second. And then Arrival in the middle at the top there is, which, as many of you will know, is a British EV startup. They're building custom purpose-built vehicles. One of the projects that they have running alongside vans and buses and other things is a purpose-built ride-hailing vehicle. And so we'll be working with them over the next couple of years to design that from scratch, and to have a vehicle that really is customized and makes sense to use as a private hire vehicle, with input from our driver base, which is fully electric, and hopefully becomes a signature part of the urban transport ecosystem. As well as that partnerships, the thing that we're doing to try and make that cost equation make sense is to raise money through something called the Clean Air Plan. So every time someone takes a trip in London, and has done, and this has been live for 2.5 years now, a small fee is added to every mile of that journey, called the Clean Air Fee, and that money accumulates over time, and it accumulates in a savings pot essentially that drivers can then draw down on when they're ready to switch. So individual drivers will have a number associated with all the trips that they've taken, and at the point at which they want to switch from a non-electric vehicle into an electric vehicle, they'll claim back their portion of the balance with one of these partners, and we'll provide that money. And 2,000, this number's gone up slightly since put these slides together, but just over 2,000 drivers have done that already. They've used that support to make that switch. And we have over £140 million ready and waiting to be used. And our commitment is that it will only be used to support this decarbonisation. So it's there We do everything we can to encourage drivers to use it, and it makes a big difference. In 2.5 years in, drivers have some drivers have thousands of pounds now accumulated, and that can be the difference between a Tesla Model 3 being affordable or unaffordable for them as their next car, or a Kia Niro or a Nissan Leaf, whatever it is that's right for them. And so that's us, with support from our rider base, doing what they can do to try and make that transition make sense economically. But it's not just about the cost of the vehicles. Clearly, the things that sit around that have to make sense too. And every time we talk to drivers or put surveys together on what is it that is holding you back from making this switch, the other thing, as well as it's expensive, that comes out very highly is, I don't know how I would charge it. I don't have the ability to charge my vehicle. I'm nervous about making this switch because it feels like a big change. And that's a very real consideration. It's a particularly significant consideration for cities like London, where the vast majority of the population live without access to reliable off-street parking. So it's not like their option is putting a charger on their driveway and everything is convenient. So we have to do a lot of work to understand how that ecosystem of chargers gets built out in a way that makes sense for all residents, but especially those who don't have their own solutions. And so we think the best way for us to do that is to work with the industry leaders and with government to try and share what we know, share our data, share our understanding of the types of requirements that professional drivers have, and in some cases invest our own money in trying to make this happen quickly. So the two examples you'll see here, we have a partnership with BP Pulse, who are have the largest network of rapid chargers and on-street charging in the UK. And so we opened our first hub in conjunction with them, which has dedicated charge points for Uber drivers earlier this year. It's based in Westminster, and there'll be a number of those still to come for people who need to charge on the go. And also working with local authorities and boroughs, and particularly places which haven't had as much investment up to this point in things like EV infrastructure. Those of you who are close to the industry will know it's quite, depending on where you live, it's quite a different story. And places with early adoption, generally speaking, more affluent parts of the city, have much better provision of public charging. And so we've pledged to invest some of our own money, £5 million, to try and bring other parts of the city up to speed slightly. £5 million will by no means solve the problem, but from the conversation we've been having so far, is a good sort of start to seed investments that others might make, or to trial or pilot solutions for charging on the street, so that if you don't have a driveway, you do have a reliable place that you can charge on your road, in your neighborhood, somewhere which is near enough that it either helps people who have already switched, make this all more convenient, or it encourages those who haven't yet switched to do so. Those kind of actions, so they're working with the car industry, working with the charging industry, critically important, and things that we can and should do and continue to do. But the reality is also that this transition won't happen without significant public and government support. And so you'll have seen over the last couple of years, increasingly aggressive targets set both at the national and the city level around decarbonisation, and those things that we feel very supportive of. The move to no new sales of petrol and diesel cars by 2030 was something that we championed. Likewise, the congestion zone charges has been a really important, and the exemption from those for electric vehicles has been a really important swing factor in making the economics work for key drivers. So we will be again doing what we can do to share information and data and insights when asked, with policymakers, to make sure that these kind of progressive policies continue to exist, and likewise the support that governments offer. I'm talking about the UK because it's the example I know best, but it's true in other parts of the continent and the world as well. Through things like subsidy of the plug-in car grant, which is the UK example, subsidies of EVs, continue to exist to a point where the industry gets to a level of maturity that makes sense. I think we've seen lots of great movement on this over the last couple of years, but we're still in the early adopter phase, very much so. And so it still feels like there's lots that can be done. And all the work and analysis that we do on this shows that the policy actions and the sort of blanket impact that they have is a really powerful lever, either to accelerate and encourage adoption, or if done badly, to decelerate and discourage adoption. So we'll continue to work very closely where we can with policymakers. We will also continue to do everything we can to articulate to the driver base why this is an important switch. We can do this in a whole host of different ways, and we've had to actually innovate a lot over the last year and a half as we've moved everything online and not had an ability to talk as much face-to-face with drivers about how we do it. But the two things that I think are probably most powerful are a program we've set up, as you can see on the left-hand side there, with some of our existing drivers who have already moved into electric vehicles, called our EV Ambassador program. It's been a really great way to have drivers who live and breathe this experience every day talk to their peers about why the switch to electric is a sensible move, what it's meant for them, what their concerns were, whether or not they've realized those concerns have played out. It just is a very authentic way to articulate this message and translate something which, many of you, I'm sure, will have found. Often people believe that climate change is a big problem and they are inspired to do something about it, but find it fairly difficult to connect that to their day-to-day lives or their individual choices. I know that I often do. And so to hear someone talk about this transition, not in the highfalutin terms of long-term carbon emissions, but to talk about it in the day-to-day practicalities of doing their job, I think is really powerful. And that has proven to be a very helpful thing over the last couple of years, and we will continue to work on that program and expand it. And likewise, as you would expect, we have a constant communication of the offers that are available on vehicles. We host sessions to help drivers understand what it takes to go electric and why that's important. We publicize things as much as we possibly can through the channels that we own and the communications that we own. But all of that work focused on vehicles and partnerships and drivers would all not be enough if we didn't also have users of the platform, customers of Uber, who believe that this was an important transition. We can't do it without the other half of the business, really, which is the riders, be they individuals or be they partners like yourselves. And so on top of everything there, we've also built a new product called Uber Green. Some of you will have seen this before. Hopefully some of you will have used it before. It now exists in almost all of our major European cities and US cities, and in some other places too. It is exactly the same experience as the Uber that you already know. The difference being that every time you request a vehicle, you know that it's going to be a cleaner vehicle. And in London, every time you request a vehicle, you know it's going to be a fully battery electric vehicle. And so what it provides is the option to make a positive choice. We launched it in March this year in central London, so it's available in all of Zone 1. And we did that because we wanted people to feel like they could play a role. Everyone pays their clean air fees when they take trips. Sometimes they do so knowingly, sometimes they do so without noticing. It's not a very active choice. This is a chance to really make a positive contribution and to do so in a way that makes sense for you as an individual or a company, and for drivers. And we put a lot of work into getting this right. And we did that on 3 fronts, really, or 4 fronts, I should say. So first off, Uber works because it's a reliable service where you know that you can request a vehicle, one will turn up very soon, it will take you to where you want to be. You can rely on it all the way through. And we couldn't really launch a version that was good for the planet, but didn't meet that basic test. So the reason we started with Zone 1 is because we needed to get to a point where we had enough EVs on the platform that same test was passed, and you weren't waiting for hours and hours for your car to turn up. We also wanted to make sure we could do it in a way that was affordable. I strongly believe that the sustainable option should not be the more expensive option, and that it should not be the preserve of people who can afford it to be able to make these choices. And so Uber Green in London is the same price to riders as UberX, and sometimes slightly cheaper. It's never more expensive. And I think that is an important principle, and also means that we can ensure that we're not pricing people out of being able to make that choice. As I said, every car that you request is battery electric, so it has no exhaust emissions. And then we've also, again, to try and encourage as many drivers as possible to take it up, set it up in such a way that for the rest of this year, and potentially beyond, but definitely for the rest of this year, the commission rate that we take on those trips is much lower than it would ordinarily be, and so drivers keep a bigger proportion of their earnings. That's partly in recognition of the fact that these cars are still more expensive, and so everything that we can do to try and help drivers ensure they're earning good money whilst they're driving them is a good thing. And secondly, it's also just us investing in this transition and recognizing that we need more and more of this to be happening, and therefore there are things that we can do in order to make it happen. And this will only become a bigger part of the sort of Uber portfolio over time, because Uber Green, yes, it's fairly new now, but as we move more and more of the business to electric, with that target to be 100% by 2025, we would expect more and more people to be also making that active choice to use these vehicles, and we'll be expanding across the rest of the city to our other cities in the UK, hopefully over the course of next year. And as I said, we're already available in lots of other parts of Europe and the US and beyond, I think, in 2022. So that is really the core of what we are doing. I will just spend one or two more minutes talking to you a little bit about how I think some of this translates into specifically the Uber for Business world. And then I'd be really happy to hear your questions and try and address anything that this has sparked or things that you came into thinking about. So, broadly speaking, as you know, Uber for Business is about us taking what started life as a product that's focused on individuals and thinking about how it works for corporate travel, and that's grown enormously over the last few years. The last year and a half has been very difficult, I'm sure, for everybody on this call. But we've expanded to think about all the ways in which we can make it make sense for you as customers, and providing you with options to integrate some of these sustainability efforts feels like a logical place to take that. So one of the things that we've done on top of launching Uber Green is started working on how we help clients think about their carbon impact. So for the first time this year, we'll be producing a view of our emissions on a trip level for the UK and Europe. So we did that for the US and Canada last year. We produced a report that showed what emissions associated with all the trips that were taken on Uber looked like over the last 3 years. We're going to be doing the equivalent work for that to be published in the autumn for the Europe and the UK. And what that means is, in order to put that together, we've had to build out an understanding of the carbon footprint of every single trip that is taken. And that's a very powerful thing, because it allows us to then use that information to do things like create dashboards and calculators for companies who are buying trips in bulk, and say, okay, we can also help you break that down and understand individually what the footprint it looks like for your travel, and importantly, how you reduce that through things like introduction of green as an option for employees. We also think that innovation around how you book and use Uber is important. So yes, it's important that the options are as clean as possible, but they also have pass that convenience and reliability test. And probably one other thing which is worth mentioning before I get to questions is Uber Reserve, which is again just launched in the UK. So this is us changing slightly the mode for how it works. So ordinarily, Uber is as quick as it possibly can be. First vehicle that's available turns up. That works in lots and lots of cases, but sometimes you need a little bit more predictability than that. And so we've created a version called Reserve, where for premium trips you can book 30 days in advance. Let us know when you'll be ready to ride and who you'd like to ride with. And then we will schedule that for you either on an individual car-by-car basis, or I'm fairly sure, although Maria is more expert in this than me, but you can do that on a kind of group booking level as well. And so innovations like that, alongside the work that me and the team are trying to do on sustainability, feels like important steps in getting to a point where you know that you can reliably use Uber as a way to, as part of a transport and travel management system that has the lowest possible impact on the planet and still meets all of the important tests around convenience and reliability and affordability. Okay, I think that was all I wanted to say. I was just going to leave you with a few stats and statistics at the end here in terms of how we're doing so far. This is a beginning of a process, definitely not the end. We're proud of having raised a lot of money through riders and ourselves. We're proud of the people who have transitioned to EVs already. That number is up very significantly on where we started at the beginning of this process. But we still have a very long way to go, and there'll be a lot of work with for us to do ourselves, but also to do in partnership with the likes of you over the next few years if we're going to hit these goals. I really think we have no choice but to do everything we can to make that happen. Okay, that was all from me. I would love to hear any questions that anyone has or anything that's come up as we've gone through the process. Maria, back to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Chris. As always, educational, inspiring, and a lot of work to do, but so happy to hear about all of these initiatives. Very quickly, before jumping into the sustainability questions I've received, we've actually had a question whether one can use a dedicated driver when traveling with Uber. And that's pretty related to the last point that Chris was covering when talking about the launch of Reserve. While we're not able to always provide the same driver for any of your bookings, now Reserve actually helps us get as close as possible to that functionality. So how it works is when providing a rating for any driver after your trip, you will also be able to save them as one of your favorite drivers. And if you have these favorite drivers saved, your next reservation request will first go to them. Depending on if they're available, if they're working at that time of day, you will be able to ride with the same driver upon request. And after this short advertising break, let's go back to sustainability questions. The first one you've covered briefly, but perhaps it's worth going into it in more detail. It's a question about this CO2 calculation and emissions calculation. The question is, we have built a platform that uses internal and external data sets to report our enterprise CO2 emissions on a daily basis and down to the user level. As one of our travel partners, will Uber be able to provide a data feed showing journey and vehicle data? I think you've touched upon it a little bit, but if you could potentially expand, that would be great.
Sure, I'm very happy to. I mean, that sounds great. That's exactly what we're aiming for too, is that level of granularity on understanding emissions right down to the detailed level. So the short answer is, yes, we should be able to do that. I wouldn't promise you that we could do it today. But as I said, the work that has gone into putting together the reporting that we've committed to do as an institution has forced us to do the right thing in terms of building that level of detail. And so I'm very confident that over the next few months, we will be able to start to provide that in a much more sort of live way. And I think, so long as we can integrate APIs and other things, which I think feels very possible. I know we're all in discussions about doing that with various organizations. There's no reason why that wouldn't be possible. We wouldn't be able to articulate those emissions based on a particular subset of journeys that were taken with partners. So yes, I think that kind of support is coming, and I don't think it's very far away. I think the hard part of that process has been done now, which is the building the knowledge. Now it's about us disseminating that in a way that is easy to understand and easy to use.
Great, thank you. And I know that you're focused on how in London, Uber Green is either the same price or occasionally slightly cheaper than other Uber products. But we have a question from the Netherlands. One of our attendees asking, Uber asks for a small amount of additional money if you book an Uber Green. Can you tell me where this money goes to? Is this for the driver or for Uber?
Great question. And yes, things do differ a little bit by different markets. That's a little bit of product of us having wanted to move quickly as we could across Europe to get these kind of things stood up, and not necessarily having always been completely consistent in how it's done. I think that will, over the next year or so, we will look to consolidate around one or maybe a couple of models, just for the ease of us understanding internally, but more importantly, so that people who are using our service across different countries aren't getting a different experience. In the Netherlands example, I think that is right. That goes to the driver. As I said, we are very conscious that the drivers in lots of places are having to pay more for their vehicles, and are getting some of that back through things like fuel savings, particularly in somewhere like Amsterdam, where charging is very widely available and fairly affordable, but not always all of it. And so what we can do to rebalance the economics is really important. And so we have historically sometimes asked for those subsidies to help the driver with those economics. I think, as I said, over time, we would expect to sort of standardize that model. But as a principle, as an organization, we are pushing towards getting to a point where we feel like we can run Uber Green as a service that is equivalently priced to Uber X. It's not a premium service, just as we do in London, and so that we can do that in a way that means that everyone can afford to use it.
Great, thank you. And now switching gears a little bit into more of a corporate policy, this education piece of it all, we have a question for you. Do you have any suggestions for how a travel manager can influence and incentivize more sustainable travel choices within the team? Frequently, alternatives may come at a cost, but are needed. Do you have any thoughts on how companies can really help their wider employee populations make this switch?
Yeah, it's a great question, not an easy one. I think, as I alluded to, I think individual behavior and choices you make on a sort of minute-to-minute basis or a case-by-case basis are often more difficult to align with what you're trying to achieve at the top level, or what you might believe in terms of the longer-term transition. So all of us are guilty of doing things, be that leaving the lights on or taking the car when we could have taken the bus, or in pre-COVID life, going on a flight when we knew that it wasn't necessarily great for the planet. All of us make those choices all the time. I think the principle that we're working towards, and I'm sure is applicable outside of Uber too, is that if you make it as seamless and convenient and affordable as possible, then people will make the choice for themselves. So there's a fair amount you can do to push the message. And, we talk about, and Maria will attest to this, we talk about this agenda and electrification internally more than we talk about almost anything else. And it's important to keep repeating that message and talking about why we're doing it. And that will have an impact and an effect on people's choices. But I think you have to also make it easy for people. And so, giving people, having options that people can go to that are not going to cost them more or be less convenient. Having default settings that mean that's you by default choose the more sustainable option. Those kind of things I think are really important. I don't think it's an easy thing to achieve, but I think it's a possible thing to achieve, and I think you're also going with people in terms of what they wanting to be doing rather than working against them.
Great. Thank you. I agree. And of course, there's also maybe a more high-level hope that by working with our partners and with our corporate customers, we're also in a position to influence people's choices in their day-to-day life. So hopefully one might feed into the other a little bit. We have a bit of time for one more. This is going a little slightly more specifically into the vehicles element of it all, and definitely isn't a question that I would be able to take on Chris's behalf. The question is, are you also looking into hydrogen vehicles? Are we, Chris?
We are a bit, yeah. We get asked this quite a lot, and I think it's really interesting. So short answer is yes. I mean, our target is zero emissions, not electric. So we've no bias against hydrogen vehicles, certainly not. All the conversations I've had up to this point all lead me to believe that hydrogen is potentially a very good option in certain cases, but it's a long way from being scalable in the way that electric vehicles are scalable. And in some senses, we will be a recipient of other people's choices. You know, we rely on OEMs being able to produce vehicles at significant scale. You know, to get some of those numbers that I talked about in terms of percentages of the business that are decarbonized is hundreds of thousands of vehicles being available at prices that make sense for individuals who've been used to buying internal combustion engine vehicles. So we need that scale to exist, and that scale, is starting to exist in places in the EV landscape. It doesn't really exist in the hydrogen area, but it's an exciting technology. Certain OEMs are definitely investing heavily in making it happen. And so we're in talks about doing some trials, but specifically actually in France. There's some really interesting work happening in and around Paris with Toyota in the run-up to the Olympics about provision of the Mirai. And so we'll hopefully be working with them a little bit to understand whether there's a way in which hydrogen vehicles can be part of the answer too. So I think the answer is yes, but I would not expect you to see lots of hydrogen Ubers quite as quickly as I'm hoping you will see lots and lots of electric Ubers in whichever city you live.
Great. Thank you so much. With this, we're at time. I want to assure all of our listeners that I have received and noted all of your additional questions, especially specific to Germany, South Africa, and quite a few additional questions that we've received about CO2 reporting. I will share them with our team, and my colleagues will make sure to get back to you one-on-one. If you would like to learn more about Uber for Business, you can type more info in the chat or in the Q&A box. Honestly, both work, and we will get back to you. Thank you so much for attending. It has genuinely been a pleasure and a privilege to be able to start this conversation with top employers in Europe and beyond. And of course, thank you so much to Chris, our speaker, for sharing all of his knowledge, wisdom, and for continuing with this very important work.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks a lot, and have a good Thursday. Bye.